Okay, so first of all, let's begin with the Hornets, Palantir's drones, which are Palantir is a terrorist organization. Thiel is a terrorist, and I'll because these aren't just military targets. Palantir drones are programmed when they're running about at 20% or less battery power. They start aiming at anything that moves. They call it clearing logistics. I call it murdering civilians. And I've been down there with these drones were thick. The last time I went down was about 2 months ago, and that was a big problem. And Russia went Mad Max. Basically, they started turning everything into technicals, taking a lot of these hatchbacks. They take the hatchback door out. They turn it into technical, put a machine gun mount, plus dedicated vehicles for that too. And they were all over the place, escorting trucks, shooting down these drones. But these drones were targeting civilians, and civilians, unfortunately, civilian cars don't get gun car escorts as they're riding up and down roads. We were warned which roads to absolutely stay off of that I normally would be taking, and we had to go further in, and it was still relatively high risk. At night, you're still having 4 to 5 drones by the drone detector flying around. You don't know if they're yours, if they're Palantir. I think it got to the point where 2 months ago, an 11 and 12-year-old boy were murdered by the American company riding a bicycle. Had a Hornet drone strike them. This is the level of what we're talking about. I mean, just absolute terrorism. So that area has basically been more or less secured. The highway between, or the interstate between Rostov, Mariupol, that then runs further west for Kherson. There's now that the reaction forces have showed up and have been built up. They've taken out some. I think the last count was around 1,400 Palantir drones. Apparently, these drones are actually pretty easy to take out with a machine gun. And I just came back from Anapa. Spent almost 3 weeks there. Well, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks there, and then half a week, a couple days up in the northern Krasnodar area on the Azov Sea. And I'll tell you this: first of all, as far as fuel goes, 2 months ago when we went down there, fuel was difficult. It wasn't a catastrophe, but it was difficult, and it was maybe every second fueling station in the cities. 1 in 4, 1 in 5 on the interstate. Donetsk Oblast was even worse off. Rostov was heavily hit because there was a lot of traffic going south for the summer too. On top of that, when I went down a month ago on vacation, so we came back a week ago. I took one fuel canister, never touched it. Fuel was, well, I wouldn't say difficult, but we spent some hours in lines here and there. But then again, I kept topping it off every quarter tank, just in case. Coming back, I was topping it off every half a tank, maybe even less of a tank left. There was no problems on fuel. Fuel's everywhere. Some mom and pop stores don't have fuel. That's true. And by the way, the government's got none on that because it's accusing the larger companies of using that. This crisis, non-crisis, as an excuse to just push out their competition because those mom and pops buy from the big guys. I mean, they obviously don't have refineries of their own. So again, lucky for these journalists, they don't really have to write any stories. They just need to change dates because we had the exact same thing last August. They're just doing it a month earlier this year. We had the exact same thing the month before. And then I think it was Reuters last year that came back and said that, after everybody was screaming that it was 30-40% cut in production, and Reuters came back and said, it's actually 3%. So we don't want to admit it, but it's actually only 3%. And it's basically the same thing. Like I've been saying, most of these hits on these refineries are the fuel storage tanks. They burn nice and pretty. You get a big picture of flame and smoke. But that's it. The pipes are cut off on them. Nobody's going to put them out. They just let them burn out and they replace them. So 2 weeks, the refinery's back up and running. So that's from that side. Wild berries. Plenty of wild berry trucks on the roads, by the way. Well, the problem for the propagandists is everything has to be same state and getting worse. Because they can't, propaganda doesn't work if the other guy starts reacting to it. I'm talking about taking measures to react to it. Well, wild berries has been around a lot longer than these giant warehouses that they use have been around. Wild berries just went, two things happened. First of all, Tatiana Kim, who owns Wild Berry, she's worth about $8-9 billion. She did two things. Even though in the contract she didn't have to, she's paid back everybody that was selling through Wild Berries and lost their property. So she's compensated out of her own pocket, plus the families of the people injured and killed. She's been very generous in compensating them. Second thing the Wild Berries did was it dispersed. They went back to their old model of using lots of small warehouses all over the place. I just ordered some stuff from Wild Berries. Okay, so it may take an extra day to get it, but you get it. The women will not be denied their sea cucumber gel cream for sea cucumber sleeves that they put on their faces. For you, it's still coming. That's not an issue. So Wild Berries, and they try to do the same thing with ozone too. And again, they just disperse back to a dispersed warehouse model. It works. They're still there. It took a little adjustment. So yes, you can destroy the warehouses that are mostly empty. Most of them have been damaged or destroyed, but the company's still rolling and products are still moving. But the only reason to hit Wild Berries, as opposed to new Post, Nova Pochta in Ukraine, is just to bring terrorism. Now, Russia responded by destroying everything that's associated with Nova Pochta. Nova Pochta, on the other hand, actually did move military equipment, and they even advertised it. Russians actually do watch Ukrainian telegram channels where they tend to put everything up there like that. And they showed how Nova Pochta trucks were actually being used as part of the military logistics systems to bring in flak vests, bring in helmets. I'm not talking the family bought a helmet for their guy and sent the helmet forward. I'm talking about large shipments that their trucks are moving around. So Russia started taking them out, and nobody wants to talk about that one. But those have been destroyed. And now that it's become an economic war, Russia's gone over after all the warehouses. Kyiv is running out of food. The videos out of the grocery stores is empty shelves. Very, very empty shelves because the warehouses are being hit. And it serves another purpose: gets the civilians out of the kill zone. That's one of the things Russia's won, because Ukraine uses its own civilians as human shields. Zelensky even admitted as much once. He must have been really stoned on coke when he said it. But because any rational person would not have thought to say this. It's like, yeah, we can't remove all the civilians because the Russian military starts moving really fast. So that right there, thank you. We're using our own civilians as human shields, knowing that the Russians are going to try to avoid casualties among the civilian population. So that Russia upped the ante. Russia went and started hitting the actual logistic systems in Ukraine. They've taken out a lot of the gasoline or petrol stations. Now, in Sumy and Kharkiv, this was primarily done because Ukraine went to a dispersed model of drone warfare. So they were using these Gazelle trucks. These are small trucks with box beds. And in the boxes, they cut out one side and they put two drones in there. They drive up to the line of contact, launch those two drones, and get the hell out. Shoot and scoot, or launch and scoot in this case. But the problem is these trucks, finding these trucks is hard. There's hundreds of them. Finding them is hard because they hide them in garages. They hide them in underground parking areas and other places. But they all rely on the local gas stations or local petrol stations to fuel up. So Russia went and destroyed the petrol stations. And unlike both Russia and Ukraine strike at night, but for very different reasons. Ukraine strikes at night because it's mostly striking civilians when they're sleeping. Russia strikes at night because it's striking targets that will have minimum amount of people or will be closed altogether at night. So 400 fueling stations were taken out in those two oblasts. And then Russia started expanding that into Zaporozhye, into Poltava, into Dnipropetrovsk, Kyiv, and Chernigov. And that, by the way, also crashes the local economy because there is no fuel. There is no fuel. People can't get goods in and out, and they tend to leave the area because they can't survive in that area. So again, that goes back to getting the civilians out of the war zone. You force them out because they can't survive anymore. They can't get the produce in. They can't keep their businesses running because the fuel's gone. Ukraine, as they've posted on X, they've hit fueling stations in Belgrade and other areas, but they do it in the day while their civilians lined up to refuel. They've posted these videos on X with big pride, and it was good to see that even the American audience and others that are viewing it were just screaming at them, "You're terrorists," as they put these videos up of them attacking civilians standing in a line to fill their cars up. But that's the different tactics. That's why you see, you get 200 drones or 150 drone attacks, and there's 5-6 people killed because the civilians aren't the target. And the people killed are either the guards or maybe a night crew working in a military plant. Well, if you're working in a military plant, you got to know that you're a target. And that's another thing that's been noted. The volume of Russian attacks, the quantity of airframes used on that attacks have gone down. But they've gone down, but the damage has gone up. They've gone down because there's nothing shooting them down. You don't need to send 2 or 3 drones per target to get one through. You can just send one. It's going to get through. And that's the point now. Ukraine is out of air defense systems, and it's being heavily attrited in the rear and in the near rear. So that's going to lead to a collapse of the front for obvious reasons. Now,
what you're describing... Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, as for civilians, that's a whole different issue. The terrorism against civilians has upgraded. And that's a real thing. When Zelensky comes out there, it was like 3 people were killed, those damn bastard terrorists. Yeah, you killed 10 to 15 to 20 to 30 a day. That's the reality. Is they hitting factories these days, hitting anything is hard, particularly because there are gun trucks everywhere. The refineries, the oil companies have now been allowed to hire their own gun crews. They have gun trucks circling and patrolling the areas. There's volunteer brigades being set up everywhere for machine gunners and drivers, and money being raised to buy more pickups and turn them into technicals. There are technicals everywhere. So that makes it difficult, again, to strike these specific targets because they're coming for the refinery. So you wind up having a lot of gun trucks running around. And these drones are actually very easy to take out with machine guns. And when just understand volumes destroy drones. First of all, when I was in Anapa, 4 to 10 sirens every day, and sometimes you watch the drones flying overhead, depending where they're at. We're 100. We're just north of Anapa. It's all now Anapa. They've annexed all these villages up and down the coast into the city. We were about 100 kilometers southeast of the bridge. So again, Russians are Russians. It's a air raid siren, whatever. We're staying on the beach. It's just the Russian mentality. It's hard to phase Russians. But you see the drones heading overhead, and then you can sometimes hear them getting shot down somewhere, machine gun fire and explosions. Now, when we went to the Azov Sea, we were quite literally one row of houses away from the beach. We were renting a house there all night long. And this was they weren't shot down by missiles, they were shot down by autocannons because there's Panzer standing there. All night long, you hear this boom, boom. And this is like every 5-10 seconds, maybe half a minute, maximum a minute, all night long. So there's hundreds of drones being shot down. The amount of resources that are being used up, because believe me, the autocannon rounds are still a lot cheaper than these drones. No matter how the drone may run you $40,000, that autocannon drone round is going to run you $1, maybe $5. And you throw 30 of them, you're still making a much cheaper investment into taking those drones out. And it was all night. The 2 nights were there all night long. You're just hearing them taken out. You hear the explosions of the drones being taken out, and they're detonating. We did see one tanker that was smoking off on the far distance. We were there the night we were in. This is in Krasnodar, so we were maybe about 100, 150 kilometers away from the night that the Zaporozhye resort was hit. That's what they're aiming for now. There's resorts. They hit them at night because that's people were sleeping. Killed about a dozen civilians, women, children, families. Injured twice as many. Gelendzhik, all the people are talking about, oh, you know, it was shot down. It was not shot down. There's one Panzer, well, I'm not going to say exactly where it's at, but there's Panzer systems there, but they're aiming outwards. They're not aiming into the Gulf for obvious reasons. There's civilians there. That drone, you could see that drone that came in. It wasn't smoking. There was no tracer rounds. It was premeditated murder because you also saw it kind of turn and then aim straight down at the civilians. So that was premeditated murder. You know, the thing is, you can still overwhelm any system. No matter how many drones you throw out, sooner or later something will get through just by sheer numbers. And they're aiming for apartment buildings, and there's a lot of apartment buildings, obviously, in Russia, and private residencies too. They've been taking out singles or two-story single-family houses. You can't defend all of that. We've had 2 days ago, they hit an apartment building in Belgrade. And Belgrade is especially vulnerable because between Kharkov and Belgrade is 45 kilometers. And the border's halfway there. You know, and the front's moving toward Kharkov, but, you know, it's not a very far flight. So by the time you start picking up the drones coming in, and particularly a lot of these drones, the only metal parts on them is the fuel tank and the engine. Everything else is wooden. So they don't exactly shine on the radar systems. By the time you're picking them up, it's already in the city. 2 days ago, 8 civilians were killed, 24 were injured when their apartment buildings were struck, including small children were killed. Two small children were killed. Yesterday, they struck in Tatarstan, again, apartment buildings. I think there was 13 people were killed. So they've gone to full terror mode. That's the only thing they can do. They're losing on the battlefield. Their 40 days of pressure didn't work and would have never worked. Fuel crisis is not a crisis. It's not even an issue anymore. And they go after civilians.
Well, perhaps also for one specific person, because I'm just going to give you the headline in the Daily Telegraph. This is also about a recent attack in Krasnodar. And the headline is, Ukraine destroys air defenses guarding Putin's holiday home. And then we have a photograph of the famous Italianate palace, which supposedly was built for Putin. And then we're told that an S-400 system was attacked there, a launcher. And we were told that the launcher was being used not as an air defense system, but in order to strike to launch missiles to strike Kiev, presumably. Then we have a map which shows us where this S-400 missile system was located relative to the building they refer to as Putin's palace. And then further down, they tell us that this is also the general area where there had been an attack on the beach, the very attack that you're just talking about, and where people were killed on the beach. So it gives a fairly clear impression that they are targeting this building. And by the way, they also say that Alina, Kabayeva, the gymnast, that she lives there under Putin's protection. I mean, this is all in the Daily Telegraph, but it all reminded me very much again of what happened in December when there was the attack on Valdai. And this same article, by the way, talks about Valdai and says that this is where Putin mostly hides. He lives in Valdai. Now, the accumulating effect of all of this, if you put all this together and all the other articles that have been written, I find it difficult to avoid the impression that they are hunting Putin himself, and that this is certainly the impression that the Daily Telegraph wants us to come away with. Daily Telegraph, well known for having very close contacts with, shall we call them, important officials within the British political and civil service system. So what are your thoughts about this?
Well, first of all, we'll just begin with, if they ever manage to kill Vladimir Vladimirovich, it would probably be the nuclear end of Europe or something close enough to it. because talk about doing the stupidest thing humanly possible. Vladimir Vladimirovich is the only thing that's keeping European cities from burning at this point, quite literally. The military wants to strike deep strikes, and Russia can deep strike anything on the subcontinent, the other 58% of Europe that's not Russian owned. And the civilian demands are pretty much so the same right now. Instead of breaking Russian resolve, it always increases Russian demands to strike harder and strike deeper. So this would be about this would be, there's a Russian saying, freezing off my nose to spite my grandmother. This would be more like cutting off my head to spite my grandmother. This is about as stupid as you can be. Not to say they're not doing it, because we've seen the knuckle draggers that pass for the intellectual class in the European Union do even stupider things. So they quite well may be doing. As for this palace, yeah, I remember the exclusive when it opened up. Never mind that this giant, it exists, kinda. It was a hotel that was still only halfway built. Interior, people were doing tours through it. Interior was still, a bunch of guys white wall painting the walls, putting in wiring, and it's a hotel. Yeah, it's going to be a very expensive hotel when it opens up, but it's a hotel. And Gelendzhik is a more expensive beach resort area, which I never quite understood because the beaches aren't. I think the beaches in Napa are better, but hey, to each his own. If it was so badly done by Western hack artists, they put on the gates, because the gates don't even exist. So they photoshopped the gates in, and they copied the gates from a Macedonian. I think it was a Macedonian gates from some part of Macedonia. And why do we know this? Because there's a double-headed imperial eagle on there. Well, the thing is, it's not just the Russians that use that. And when people zoomed in, it was the Macedonian flag coat of arms on there instead of a Russian coat of arms. I mean, this was very bad. It was Navalny's crew, if I remember, that did it back then. So I guess we're back to that. Second of all, why in the world would you use an S-400 system to strike Kiev? It doesn't have the range to do it. It's got a 360-kilometer engagement range. I'm sorry, S-400 has a 380, S-300 has a 360. Still not going to get to Kiev to begin with. Sure, you can remodify these missiles, and Ukraine has done that with S-300s and S-200s to use them as a ballistic missile. But it's pointless, especially when Russia is mass-producing Iskandars that can quite literally reach out and touch, never mind things like Oreshniks and plenty of other missiles. Why would you do that? That's about as silly a thing as possible. Now, placing whether or not there was an S-400 hit, I don't know. I've seen it. All I saw was published pictures of smoke and videos that some locals took, which are stupid enough of them to take that. OPSEC is OPSEC. Obviously, civilians keep forgetting about that. But all you saw is a pile of smoke. It could have just as well been a fuel storage. In fact, I think it was even too much smoke coming up for something like a missile launcher. But that's my view on that. But again, there's nothing more that was ever shown. So what was hit, I don't know what was hit. And obviously the military is not going to say anything, and rightfully so. So that's just the Western media jumping to conclusions. Whether or not it's a good place to put it, probably is a decent place. I wouldn't put it right near a building, obviously. It's a little too obvious. But it's a good enough place to put it in case something heavy's coming toward Gelendzhik. You want to intercept it as far out over the Black Sea as you possibly can. And it's high ground. I mean, it's a mountainous area. They're relatively low mountains at this point, but they're already mountains. Yeah. It's a high area that gives you high reach and far reach. While you put the more tactical systems up further front to cover the beach areas. So yeah, I'm sure there's somewhere up there would be a system. I'd put one up there somewhere. Yeah. Whether that was hit or not, nobody knows. And if I knew, I wouldn't say it for obvious reasons. But that palace is not a palace. It's a very expensive hotel that apparently still hasn't opened. Because if you go on there, you can't find it listed. But yeah, that they're rehashing this is silly. Valdai, Putin has a residency. I knew about. Everybody knows about that residency. They knew about that residency. Most people knew in the area knew about that residency. I found out about that residency. I went to see a supplier in Chibur. What was the name of the town? I can't remember the town now, but Severstal is located there, and it's right near that Valdai area. And that was back 20 years ago. So this isn't exactly a secret. The fact that 92 drones were launched at it, that's a little bit of a different issue. I doubt Putin spends that much time there because the man is on the move and spends actually, according to his own admission, he spends most of his time in the Kremlin because Kremlin is heavily defended. And he's on the move a lot between events and meetings and so on. But why would anybody? Now, his family members may be up there. That's a whole different issue. And I'm sure the West would try to take them out too, just because. As the Americans have set the standard, murdering leadership of other countries is A-OK. It's A-OK because not a lot of Americans have been targeted yet, but that's coming too. And then they're going to start screaming bloody murder about that. And now that Trump has now been listed as a target, supposedly he was removed off of his Air Force One, moved to a different plane because Iranians were targeting. Well, Mr. Trump, you set the standards, and you're now one of those targets, and so is everybody in your administration. You set those standards.
Yeah.
Actions have results.
Can I make just a quick few observations? Because I've been following these stories specifically about this palace, but I mean many other things. One of the things I've discovered about Vladimir Putin is whatever bad information, bad, incorrect, wrong information is circulated about him in the West, provided it is sufficiently scandalous, it becomes accepted and internalized often within the very highest levels of the security and political system. So you may prove any number of times that this building is not a palace, but indeed a hotel. And I've argued that point myself. I've explained why it is, in fact, exactly what you said. But you will not get anybody in Whitehall, in Foggy Bottom, in Langley, and of course in Kiev to believe you. That is one thing I have discovered. The second is that we have had leaks and commentaries in the West as well, that the way to win this war ultimately is to provoke a crisis, an internal crisis inside Russia. After all, wasn't that what the 40-day terror that Zelensky was talking about, the 40-day campaign, ultimately was about? And isn't this what we are seeing now with this attack on this building? We may know that the whole thing is nonsense, but they don't believe that it is nonsense. They do believe it is some kind of palace owned by Putin. And to me, I have to say, it does look like they're hunting him.
Yeah, I quite believe they have. They are hunting them. There is record. Even going back. I mean, maybe it's a conspiracy theory, but maybe not. The Malaysian aircraft that was shot down back in.
Let's keep away from that because that's a very that can get us into trouble. But anyway, yeah.
Okay. Let me say there have been rumors that Putin's plane has been targeted before in different areas. So they may be, and the drones we saw in Valdai. I'm sure they are hunting them. It's a stupid move because the people that would replace them are going to be much more hardline. And by the way, the other thing to consider too, elections are coming up in Russia, 20th of September. United Russia has been the power party, has had supermajority for quite a long time. Looks like they may be losing supermajority. They'll still probably retain majority, but they'll lose supermajority. The two parties that are coming up is LDPR, which I'm a member of, and the communists. So you have the right and the left pushing up. And by the way, both are demanding a much harder response to the West and to NATO. So what comes out of the elections after September 20th may be a very different political landscape at that point. If either of those parties gain enough and United Russia loses enough, that they have to form a coalition with one or the other, and more likely they form a coalition with LDPR, but you never know. Then the policies may change quite a bit, and the pressure on the executive will change quite a bit. So we'll see. That's a little over a month ago. Away. Things may change radically.
We may change radically. Stanislav, we have to finish there because this is, but again, an invaluable program. And thank you very, very much for all the information that you've given us. Let's have you on again soon, because I'm sure that an awful lot of things are going to happen, and they're going to happen very dynamically and quickly.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. And by the way, if anybody wants to be an observer to the elections, international observers, they're taking volunteers right now.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Stanislav.
Thank you, Stanislav.